exercise better defend the North?
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. So I want to pause on being certain that this is a nation-state attack. Regardless of what we might have heard this early into the investigation, I don't know that someone could actually conclude that. Just because it's a supply chain attack doesn't mean it is. It does make it more likely, especially depending on what supply line was compromised coming in. We don't yet know what it is that is misbehaving or even how it was first noticed. We don't know that the outage wasn't something that the company took down intentionally for safeguarding, or if it happened on its own and then through the investigation of root cause they discovered there was a compromise. We know right now that they're choosing not to re-energize out of caution and safety concerns. And so I think what we can expect to see is they're going to have to start sharing with some of their partners specifically what happened, because this may not be isolated just to this one company or just to this one sector. If it's something like a PLC, that could be all over the place. If it's comm gear or if it's software, that could be everywhere. And this could be the beginning of a larger foothold in the attack. The attack itself could be a disruption to create opportunities to go somewhere else. And so there's so much unknown, and it will be really helpful when more gets shared and we can start to check our own houses.
Thank you for that, Mark, and you're giving us lots to think about. Jesse, if I can bring you as my second co-host into this discussion, and then I'll go to Roshan and Brian and probably George after that. Jesse, when this news came out of this could potentially be a nation state, I don't want to be fixated with this, but from your perspective, how does that change your environment and the action items you take, given how central your work is within the supply chain environment?
Yes, I think this will have a huge impact on the retail business space for sure. We probably will not be able to operate any of our locations due to, first of all, not having the electricity to begin with, and also not being able to deliver to our locations to start off with. I think as one of the takeaways from this, definitely for me, is that there has to be communication channels that we need to establish with the general public within our business because right now, if the power is out, there's no communication from cell or phone, emails, everything's down. How do you communicate within your business? How do you communicate with the public? How do you bring that news to the public that we're having so that so you can avoid disruption, violence, and panic within the community? Not just within your business, but within the community as well.
Thank you for that, Jesse. Roshan, if I can drive you into the conversation now, you've been observing and we've debriefed as well. From a tooling perspective, from an observability perspective, what is critical, like in everything that you've heard, the impact on financial and in utilities, what are those critical takeaways you think people need to have into what should they be monitoring at this point, your perspective?
Well, if I could just actually echo what Mark says, it's really early to make a determination that this is in fact state-sponsored. It would be such a huge shift in operating posture for to go after something like this without relatively understanding what the motivation would be. We would definitely be looking to see what else is potentially going on geopolitically. Is this a distraction attempt? Is there something else in a country that they're trying to distract us from? Those are things we've seen, and that's potentially possible. But the reality is that, a similar attack would be like the Stuxnet incident, where that was state sponsored. But even then, no one's really stepped up and said, yes, we did that. But there was a lot of 0 days that were used to do something like that. And if something like that would happen here, 0 days like a magic spell. You get to use it once before it sort of is no longer useful. Why would somebody do that in this case? Is this a situation where somebody is trying to take take credit for something that is just happening to build their own, and therefore that could be what we're hearing. But it could also be something where this is an attack that is leading to something else. And so we would definitely be seeing indicators, and we'd be looking to see what else could potentially happen. But motivation is a key point. Brian, I think you should really be stepping in for what you would be looking at.
Well, no, we work well together. Just some of the stuff I was thinking, because we get these questions all the time can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
I'm not hearing myself. We get these questions all the time in operations, right? Like, what should I do based on this geopolitical thing that happened? And I mean, a lot of it's like, well, we're going to have to wait and see, right? But Occam's, we use the Occam's razor thing all the time, and we're like, listen, I don't know, even though I do threat intelligence, like that's our job, is to try to figure this out. Until we get indicators, TTPs, that match up to a diamond model for a threat actor, that's going to be later. But for now, get your controls in place. Like, this is what I tell every client. I'm like, it doesn't matter what kind of attack. Literally, just your CIS 18 stuff. Are you doing that? Because if you're not doing that, don't worry about state, nation state. Worry about like everybody at that point. So it got to a point doing incident response for 20 years, right? Forensics, incident response, all the stuff, where that's my canned response now. I'm just like, okay, how are red, yellow, green in the CIS 18? How you doing? I don't know. That's your first problem, right? Like, it's get proactive about your controls. Do all the proactive stuff. The tabletops like this, the pen testing. Make sure your policies and procedures are sorted. Your incident response plans are up to date. You have an incident response retainer with somebody, hopefully, because you try to get one of those at the last second. I can tell you, it's like every IR team I know right now is slammed, and they're saying no unless they have retainers. So, tooling and all that stuff, it's all the tools that go with the CIS 18.
Yeah.
That's been about the best answer I can give so far.
If I could add too, I mean, a nation state's going to try and hide their tracks. They're going to try and find scapegoats. They're going to try and go after logs. They may try and set up a situation where an identity is going to take you in a different direction in terms of what could happen. But it's all part of a coordinated attack for some really valuable target. And if we don't know what that is, like there's a lot of things that could happen. So having telemetry, having, as Brian said, the full gamut of capabilities to see what's going on and protect the data that it's going to be relevant, because it could be years before we can really make a determination.
Yeah, just lock all the doors, right? That's my analogy for CIS 18. Is there are 18 doors and windows in your home in a high crime area. What are you going to do with those, right? Like, it's honestly, I think, I think it's received well by every industry and every client that I've talked to, because outside of knowing, like, there's not something specific you're going to defend with for a certain, like, like based on attribution to a threat actor, right? Like, you are going to look at their TTPs and their IOC, but that's what you do for all, threats. So yeah, just lock your doors and windows is kind of what I say.
Sure, I'm going to go to Roos Bay, but I do want to prime you. There was a comment that was made about IR plans and IR teams unless they're on retainer, and I want to tie that back because we had a conversation on threat intelligence and insurance, and I do want to come back to that. So be prepared. I'm coming to you shortly, but Roos Bay, I'll go to you, and then Rachel and George, and then your place, Roos Bay.
I absolutely agree with Brian and Roshan around the steps to be taken by the entity that's taken the hit. Once you're hit, just basically you just have to recover from that, regardless of who hit you and what the motivation was. I think that's the first step. However, I think what's important in this is for every other CISO, all the other organizations and entities out there, because if this is a nation state, then chances are this is not the end game. Hitting Horizon is not the end game. That this is broader than that. So everybody else needs to, get their elbows up, be on guard, and take necessary measures to potentially be hit too.
Okay, George, I want to come to you, and then Rachel on the threat intelligence piece, and then we'll go over to you, Jack. George, we spoke a lot about this in terms of declaring, state of emergency, acts of terrorism, etc. One thing that I noticed even in the conversations that were happening online is, who do you, in this situation, from a threat intelligence sharing perspective, and to be very direct, knowing who your allies are in this situation, how does that factor into the response?
Well, again, I agree with Brian that, like, at bare minimum, you should be locking the doors per se of your own organization and capability if you're running a critical infrastructure system or environment. That said, it's important to look at attribution, and if it's a highly likely, and also, by the way, like, yeah, you're right, Mark, you can't quite confirm at this time what's up, but in the intelligence language, highly likely or highly probable, you could probably assign it to be a nation state actor. And usually in that 70 to 85% range of probability, that's still enough to positive action, like go forward, do a thing. With that in mind, I think you have to look at where are the potential risks and what is being attacked, right? So I would look at someone trying to take out a power grid more as a distraction. Right? There's a larger attack and a more strategic target that are either trying to destroy or steal. It's one or the other. At that point, you have to prioritize who are your main allies. So for us, politics of the day aside, the U.S. is our primary ally. They are our main ally. They're our main intelligence and security ally. Followed up by the Five Eyes partners, followed up by the 13 or 14 Eyes partners, whatever the next NATO extension of that is. So you would go to the Five Eyes partners, and there are certain organizations, coordination groups, which are not really open to the public, where you would have these conversations, be like, okay, this has happened here. These are the non-public indicators that we're seeing. What do you guys suspect? Because the important part is you go to your allies with the information you do have, and they might have the other parts of that intelligent picture. Right? They might be running investigations for weeks or months in advance and are actually tracking that, hey, we suspected that you guys were going to get attacked. We didn't have enough substantiation to warn you, but all this lines up with the campaigns that we've been seeing. So then you turn to your allies. Your allies should provide you with additional support, and then they should provide you with hopefully some sort of mitigation help. Especially if you're talking about physical issues as well, where you're talking about you need power generators, maybe you need search and rescue, maybe there's other things that you need that those countries can provide. But the most important thing is you have to get as whole of an intelligence picture as you can, like Brian's talking about, so you can actually figure out what has happened, what's going on, what are they really going after. That's where your allies come in, and you really have to have the communications channels and the SOPs with those allies in place well before the event happens.
Rachel, you work a lot with threat intelligence feeds, and George has been to both of us a very important sounding board in terms of how to work with threat intelligence feeds across both our careers. Rachel, I do want to see your perspective from the feeds that we're getting and the intelligence that we have access to. How do you draw credible insights from that and make determinations, or at least try to guide where we might see the next activity take place?
Yeah, so I think this really goes back to a lot of the things that have been said here, and putting on my incident response hat first and foremost, because threat intelligence is a tool to really conduct, to do true incident response work, right? So that's one lever I can pull. Then there's all this different tooling that exists in my environment, and partnership, like, et cetera. The list goes on. My main question here is, what are our options for containment? What opportunities do we have before the supply chain this issue keeps going down? We've had so many sectors involved, but what's the next sector that could potentially get involved in this thing, and how can we stop it in its tracks? How are we confirming that our containment actions have been successful? And who's responsible for overseeing, what group of stakeholders are making those choices on behalf of all of these companies that we have involved, on what containment steps are the most critical and which direction that we're going to go in. In terms of what you're asking about when it comes to, threat intelligence feeds and assessing the validity of information that you're getting, that's something that you think about as an intelligence analyst all the time. Is this, a credible source? Is this a source that has motivations outside of what they're potentially telling me? Is this a source that I have a history with, etc.? And going back to what George said about could this be kind of this larger attack be some sort of distraction, right? That's where attribution can become a little bit more important, is getting really to the heart of what is the motive here of the threat actor. And in that, making smarter containment decisions about where that threat actor might go next.
Please, yeah.
I thought that was excellent. I'm more focused on threat intelligence now, and at first I thought it was and I'm probably still being annoying, but I would love everything Rachel just mentioned fits inside a diamond model, right? A diamond model is a thing we use in intelligence to track threat actors, TTPs, their victims, and their infrastructure. So a lot of that fits into that. Everybody's creating their own diamond models. So there are 50 million diamond models out there for the same threat actor. It would be amazing. And we talked with CSIS and CSE about this in our CMP. If we could get some kind of national threat modeling going where that's the threat model, it gets updated based on, information exchange. So that when you're trying to attribute or you start seeing the TTPs and the victims, and then certain diamond models are going to start popping up more than others, right? And then you could, even if you don't know for sure, you've got, let's say, 3 threat actors that kind of look like it might be the nation state. You can start taking defensive measures against those TTPs to prioritize. I know I was going off about CIS 18 earlier, but which ones are you going to do first, right? And you're going to do the ones that don't exist, but also match them to the TTPs that are coming in as mitigation. So it's I keep thinking of this, I don't know who would create it, but somebody hosts something for this, and it's not public, it's public-private, right, through all these things. But we can all feed into the threat model, and we can all receive from the threat model. Go ahead.
Brian, that's a great point, and I think in order for us to tackle the cybersecurity challenges moving forward, I think we need to create that. But my question to you is, who should be creating that? Is that led by government, or is it by a particular organization? And I think that's the challenge, because I don't think anyone really knows where to start off with.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you would assume, assumptions, right? So I assume CSE, but their mandate's totally different. Maybe CCCS, maybe it's, who knows, right? There are many homes where it could live, but I think that's going to be the next conversation as we all start to work together, public-private. Thanks.
Thank you, Jesse, for that, and Rachel and Brian. Jack, we brought up insurance a few times, and again, I'm using a very cliche kind of approach, a very amateur understanding of insurance, which is we have insurance, they'll provide us resources to deal with the situation at hand. But then we heard Brian bring up an important point where unless there are retainers in place, you're not probably going to get some of these services, especially when they're at an absolute high demand. I'm going to be very upfront and ask this question. In a situation like this, does insurance even matter? As bold as that question is, I have to ask it.
Good question. I will be bold in my answer. And of course, it's always it depends. But I would say, by and large, insurance by itself is meaningless at this point, right? It's something that we'll look to down the road, right? As far as cost recovery and what have you. The typical financial risk transfer that insurance is really good at doing. The it depends part is as cyber insurance becomes a little bit more mature and players are coming in that are looking to be more proactive and preventative, right? So I can say, from my perspective, I have partnerships in place that give me essentially front of the line access to IR teams when things happen. And that way my clients essentially have, as part of their insurance, an IR retainer. Now, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that these resources are infinite, right? If everyone's constrained, everyone's going to be constrained. It's going to be a triage. So that's why, if an insurance company wants to be really smart about this, they're going to have some internal folks that can at least do some of the basics, right? We may not be able to dive deep like a good IR firm, but can we do some of the basics? Can we make sure, look, here are some things that from what we're seeing, lock these doors, make sure these windows are barricaded, and provide that kind of advice as we see, regardless of what happens to this kind of threat, whether it's a state actor or it's somebody else, it's self-inflicted wound, right? Someone's going to try and take advantage. Right? We talked about that earlier today, right? As this progresses, there's going to be opportunistic crime that's going to happen. So how do we make sure that you don't fall victim to that, when you eventually have power?
So Jack and I spoke a little bit offline earlier today, and one of the things I've been noticing is that our insurers, our cyber insurers, are becoming our best compliance. Like they're becoming the most mature thing to follow, more mature than even our frameworks. They're asking the right questions. They're not saying, hey, do you have MFA? They're saying, do you have multi-factor authentication for privileged access to your systems that are not within your defined perimeter? That's a very specific question that you can aim for. And so to continue to receive the assistance from insurance, which our business has decided to do, we're having to actually move forward in progress on our cyber program as part of that. And I've also seen the same thing where the relationships and the knowledge that's being built inside the insurance companies is like, it's a depth of understanding you never thought you'd see. I think maybe they lost their shirts at first when they just gave out the insurance for $40,000 a year, or don't worry, we've got you, and then someone really got had by a cyber criminal, and then it turned out that the bill for that one was like $300,000 or something, right? And down that same line of thinking, something I would urge everyone to do is make sure that you have the right people answering the questions. Every place I've showed up to, usually I look at what was filed last year and I'm just, this is not the truth. And so then what happens when not the truth is what you filed when you make your claim? I don't know. We haven't gone through that, but make sure those are filed correctly.
Got a quick comment there. I appreciate that your insurance partner is really partnering with you. That's really great to hear. I remember helping a customer of ours reviewing a potential rider for their policy, and the guidance was very limited. They didn't seem to care. And more importantly, but the one thing they wanted to know was that they needed to be notified of a breach within a certain period of time, or else they weren't going to pay out. And it actually was less than the average breach
Less
time.
than's reasonable.
Yeah, so that was definitely a situation where they just wanted the money. So holding and being appreciative of insurance companies that are trying to do the right thing and trying to be an asset to you, that's very encouraging to hear.
I mean, just to build on that, I mean, that really is the key, right? I mean, yes, sometimes we need insurance just to, we want to work with some big player, we need cyber insurance. Put the check in the box kind of thing. But if you're really looking for that risk transfer, right, it's being upfront, it's being honest, it's working with the cyber insurer, and don't hide it, right? I mean, those that are trying to do this properly will work with you. Those that are just looking for your premium and have no intention of paying out, the questions are going to be super, super easy. I mean, it's nothing wrong with super easy questions, but, if they're not going to help you understand what, so you have MFA on whatever, what does that really mean?
Kelly, I want to go to you and then to George. Kelly?
Yeah, I agree with everyone. What you're saying about the insurers, and I don't work for a cyber insurance company, I'll say that up front, but I've seen the difference over the past, I'll say 10 years. So it started out where people said I should have cyber insurance, similar to the comment Mark said, and nobody knew how to price it and nobody knew what it meant, but people felt better by saying I have cyber insurance. And then people started making claims, companies started making claims, and the insurers realized, oh, this isn't what we thought it was. And a lot of companies got out of the business, which is good because they didn't know what they were getting into. I do think good cyber insurance policies and companies now are partnering very well. They are asking the right questions. They are asking for evidence now in the questions. So if you say you have something in place, they want the evidence to show it, which is making the companies better and making the risk lower. So it's a win-win for both sides. And I agree that good cyber insurance partnerships and companies are providing added value. It's not just the check when you have, the car accident, you get the check. It's someone who's actually helping you through the situation with incident response partnerships, with information, with potentially guidance on when you have to report to the government, and all kinds of other aspects of what's happening during that incident. And if you're not getting that from your cyber insurer, then find another one.
Okay, George and then Kush.
Yeah, I gotta say, first of all, to Jack's point, if you have a good broker, like I went through the insurance process when I started at my current employer. The broker is the game changer. If you have a good broker, they'll quarterback you through the process and your life is good. If you have good underwriters, then they'll give you a policy that's fair. To Mark's point, when I walked into my organization 2-3 years ago, to figure out how mature it actually was, the first assignment I got was, hey, get a cyber insurance. So I had to take the big questionnaire and I went around and I was like, cool, so we're good here, here, and here, but we have to mature here, here, and here. That actually became my roadmap plan for the next year. Right, so then we matured, then we did the form again, then we're like, okay, cool, we have to do some more work on our BCP. All right, cool, so we do that, then we get the insurance, then we go through the risk discussion and figuring out how much it's gonna cost and all the numbers behind it. But I think nowadays, you can look at all these roadmaps, and I see all these CISO publications of like what to do in your first 90 days. If you don't have insurance, really that should be what you do. Nowadays, I got to tell you, Mark is right. Your insurance providers and the scrutiny that they're going to give you, the friendly scrutiny, that's going to be the best guidance that you have to building a mature, safe cyber program. Insurance should be mandated across the province and across the country for cybersecurity, and I do think the day is going to come when it is legislated as a mandatory thing that we all need to have if we want to participate in the government supply chain.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Sure, and then we'll go to Kush.
It'd be interesting to know how many of the people watching, if there's directors of ITs watching, are they aware of the requirements in their cyber insurance policy? Because I've talked to many who are, legal's got it, I don't know. So that would be a definite takeaway is it's too late to look at what your insurance will cover and what you need to do during an incident.
That's going to stop, though, because the questions are getting so hard that legal's like, hey, can I help, please? That's what's happening.
Yeah, I hope so.
I want to go to Kush, and then we have about 10 minutes, so I do want, actually 13 minutes. I want to bring it back to a couple of other items that happened today. Kush, please go ahead.
Thank you. From a municipal perspective, many municipalities across Canada are kind of scoped out, right, out of getting cyber insurance. So many of them have them. About half municipalities in Ontario have cyber insurance today. And we're seeing the renewals coming, and then we see rejections coming. And the ones that where the mayors and councillors are asking the municipalities to get cyber insurance, we're seeing because of the extensive amount of information and controls that they require to be put in, you can't actually acquire the insurance. So
The insurers are rejecting.
yes, correct. They're rejecting them. So one is they're rejecting them. Yes, if the controls are not in place. And so when you receive that new form, it has so many things in it that what happens is many times the municipalities are not even attempting to even submit it. So it's just, that is the kind of trend we're seeing in the last few years. Now, what's happening now because of that, so a different model, so George was talking about legislation. We are going towards discussions now, at least in the municipal sector, of self-insuring. So that's a whole different model than legislation and the current model. Because we are getting priced out. And so it's done in other sectors of government. They self-insure for many things,
So
which I won't talk about here, but yes.
The self-insuring process, this is my first time hearing of it, and truth be told, at this table, I don't have as much ground experiences you have. So is this sort of a trust me, bro, we got this kind of scenario?
No,
or is it?
no. So when you self-insure, you have to have funding in place for that insurance.
Okay.
So very simply, I won't get into complications of it, but you could say that you're the insurance company. So you pool money together between multiple municipalities. This is a hypothetical example.
Okay.
And then you pool the money and you keep it, and you do what the insurance companies do, you invest it, etc. When there is a breach, you tap into that reserve.
What happens when everyone gets breached at the same time?
And it makes it sound like we don't want to spend money on putting the right controls in place to get the right insurance, so we're just going to take a risk and then have to pay ourselves.
No, I think the system today is set up with so many caveats and specific legalities that will exclude you from actually getting the payout. So if you get a piece of paper that says, okay, we're going to give you this piece of paper, you're going to pay us this much money, but there's 10,000 clauses in it from lawyers, and you're not going to get paid out. It's a paper exercise.
So then they're not insured, really.
Well, they have so many clauses, I don't think we have the time today. But what happens is you will get rejected. And so it is basically a checkbox exercise for making the executive and the board happy, right? In that specific scenario, not in every scenario.
AV team, if I can ask, I know we have 10 minutes. I'd like to add another 5 if everybody's okay. Because there's an interesting question that George has and a few things that George, you asked a question to Kush, and I'll just repeat it. What happens then if all the municipalities that are part of that, what I call the trust me bro, but it's not, the self-insurance element, what happens if...
Cooperative.
The cooperative, that's the diplomatically correct word. What happens if all of them get hit at the same time?
Yeah, so the likelihood of that is very low. However, if it does happen, right, I can only speak from a municipal perspective here. So in that case, there are specific reserves in every municipality. So, and this is not related to cybersecurity. These are general reserves that are set aside for circumstances beyond your control, right? So let's suppose COVID-19 is a perfect example. Almost every municipality had to dive into their reserve bank, and reserves have to be there for municipalities to fight against COVID with respect to the financials. So it's a similar concept. This is not a new concept in government. This has been going on since government. Now, I think if you're not familiar with how the nuances work, you could take that concept, take some of the private sector ideas, put them together into a new discussion. So it's not actually occurring specifically for cybersecurity yet. However, it's the first time last year that municipalities have started to embrace a little bit of that idea and start discussing it internally within the municipalities.
Okay. That just made me think of something from my, sorry, it's 2 seconds. So based, like my Canadian Forces days, it's long ago now, but part of it was the primary reserve was tasked with helping the homeland, right? So like slinging sandbags was usually a thing for flooding and all that. Well, the forces now have cyber warriors, and they have reservist cyber warriors. This is just me brainstorming in the last second, haven't talked to anybody about this. But I'm wondering if that will become a thing, just like responding to a natural disaster.
I am one.
No, but I know from us being in ops, like in the field, but like I'm just saying, like there might be something that it would be signals. So it's like just get some people. Like if it was suspected nation state, could you spare some people to go help?
I'll tell you that there would be a lot of maturity that has to happen that we're years away from. The only thing that they can protect is CAF and D&D itself.
Yeah, but the skill set is transferable. So, like, just like I can sling a sandbag because I'm a gunner on a lav, like, I'm not using my gunner skills anymore. I'm doing sandbags.
If you convince ADIM to second or like resources like that, power to you, brother.
No, it's just but it's an idea, right? It hasn't been discussed, but
from a municipal perspective, since 2019, we've been floating this concept within the municipalities, and we've last year we actually drafted a specific contract for municipalities to work with each other, share information. It's a legal contract. and we started with IT, and we're going to start looking at including cyber in that. So from a what we call kind of a cyber reserve perspective, let's say, I don't think it's coordinated, to George's point, across the government, but at least from a municipal perspective, we're taking proactive measures in that area.
I'll add one more thing. Just and from a private sector perspective, an organization I used to work at, we had a customer for a contract who required insurance that we just couldn't get covered by anybody. And there was some talk at that point of just setting up, as you say, a cyber reserve with significant amounts of money. In the end, it was negotiations with the customer to figure out how to make it more palatable. But the reality also is that there are many insurance companies, even the good ones, who have underwriters who are actively just trying to make their target at the end of the year by not paying out. And I hate to say it, I had drinks with somebody about a year ago who was quite proud of the fact that that's what they were trying to do, not pay out. So.
And to add to that, I've actually come across a few incidents where the cybersecurity insurance companies are looking to way not to pay you out. They're finding loopholes in your cybersecurity insurance where you've kind of just checked that off, and they're looking for those loopholes and making sure that they find ways to not pay you out. So that's out there as well. I've come across 2 incidents.
Okay.
Can I say?
So
Let's go Jack and then Roshan.
Sorry, Jack.
That's okay. All right. So I have to be a little argumentative here. So certainly there is evidence of certain insurance companies that do this. This is going to be especially true when you get a rider on top of some other piece of insurance. All right. Plus, there's all kinds of reasons why you don't want to do that, because it impacts all your insurance, blah, blah, blah. Insurance is not really my experience, my expertise. It's really more on the technical side. But when an insurance company isn't paying out, it's usually because you said, yes, I absolutely have ironclad secure backups in place for all of my critical data, and you don't.
And that's what I said.
So we have an example right now where we have a company who said absolutely our backups are secure, they're separate, they're immutable, and they were stored on 2 SANs on 2 sides of the same flat network. That's none of those things, right? So, it's a little bit of a lot of times, if you don't qualify for cyber insurance, you kind of have to ask yourself why. It's not because the insurance company doesn't want your premium, right? The insurance company wants your premium, right? It's because you don't have the controls in place and you don't have the money to invest in it, or you're not interested in making those investments.
It's like a
There are many reasons why, right? But, if you had the right security in place. I've worked in a municipality in IT, leading a lot of this stuff, and there is a tremendous amount of end-of-life equipment that is sitting in the municipality.
And I agree with you on that, and I think people can fill out the questionnaire wrong for 2 reasons. One, because they're not actually clear. They ask their team, do we have backups? Do we have MFA? And their team says yes, and they fill it out. So they were misinformed, or they could just fill it out wrong on purpose to get the insurance. I agree with you. I think the industry's growing and maturing, and everyone on both sides is learning. So I think we all need to expect that. If you go to get car insurance and you lie about how many tickets you have and they find out, then there's going to be repercussions. It's no different.
Right. And a lot of times it's not, the insurance companies will look at it like, okay, so there's a mistake here, or there's a mistake there, right? We're human, right? The good ones will look at that and look, like, what's the pattern here, right? And start making decisions that way.
Jack, very quick question, 30 seconds response. And I don't want to make this all about insurance, but this has become a critical thing because we've been talking about reserves. We've been talking about, do we have enough people? Do we have enough resources? And of course, insurance is something that we may look to. You said that, we don't pay out if you lied or you were untrue in your submissions. But you accepted those submissions without evidence? So you didn't evidence any of those submissions? You didn't look at any pictures, any logs, any actual files and network diagrams that can attest to what they're saying?
This is one of the things that surprised me when I entered the insurance game 2 years ago, is that depending on the size of risk, they're not asking for evidence. is based on you know, telling us the truth. And it's kind of how insurance works. Like, you know, your insurance company doesn't ask for proof that you're maintaining your vehicle. Right? It's the same sort of idea here. They're not asking for proof that you actually do your patches.
Or if you buy...
The insurance company isn't going to decline, or at least a good one, isn't going to decline a claim because you missed one patch and it happened to be the critical patch that caused the breach. Right? They're going to be looking at a history. Have you never patched this particular device? Right?
But I think, sorry, just to add to it, but I think insurance companies are now starting to ask for documentation. They're starting to run pen testing on your environment, even though you're able to provide them with your existing pen testing or any kind of
100%.
audits you've done internally. They're actually doing their own audits to make sure what you're stating on your document is true as well.
Yeah, and that's something that happens as the risks increase, right? It's sort of like, at what level you want to go. I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, administration that has to take place, both for the insurance company as well as all the individual clients. So at what level does it start to make sense? And certainly, you know, if we look at municipalities, we talk a lot about them, they hold a lot of data, right? So it would make sense to do some audit and to do some checks.
You know where I thought money, I know we only had 30 seconds, but for every single IR engagement I've pretty much ever been on, we're the IR team. You parachute us in, we do the thing, we create a report, we get out, we go to the next one. What's missing from the whole NIST IR life cycle is the recovery piece, right? So that's usually the most painful part, actually, is just trying to get the place back up and running. That's where there's no budget, nobody knows what's going on. How are we going to do that? Well, you know, we gave you recommendations that somebody needs to go fulfill now so that you don't get popped again. And we're like, okay, you got this, and we leave. And then you hear they're still trying to recover 2 years later, 3 years later. I think that recovery thing is something that is understated in the, not just nation state, whatever, any cyber attack. How are you going to get back up to business? And I know it's DRP and BCP, but I got to tell you, even working, anyway, I'll leave this part out, government entity, right? There was no thought of how are we going to get our operations sort of back up and running. It's going to, okay, we contain, we remediate, we don't do the full investigation to figure out if there's anything else going on. We don't know where we're down. We don't even know what our critical business workflows are. Never mind trying to get back up. So I think just, I was going to say containment, recovery needs some attention.
Okay.
Right?
We've got about 3 more minutes to conclude, and I'm cognizant of the audience that's online as well. 2 very quick things that I want to touch before we set it up for tomorrow. Mark, a quick question for you. We focused a lot on the response, the human side, the procedural side, the operation side, and the likelihood of this escalating. From a technical standpoint, what needs to happen right now from a technical security standpoint? What resources do we need, and where should we be focusing our attention at this point?
So inside of Horizon, they need to be isolating the type of system that has the supply chain problem. And they need to figure out what does it look like if we remove that? Can we still operate? And the specific technical knowledge that's going to be required will be to some degree dictated by what the thing is. Everyone else probably needs to start freeing up their people to be ready to respond once we learn more. Those, especially the business partners that are connected with this company, not just the ones that are fed by them, but the ones that have data connections for whatever reason, which is probably way more than you might think, and similar domains of work, which is hard to know until we know what the supply chain that is attacked. But it's certainly going to be some analysts, some infrastructure people. It's going to be some software people, and you go dust off your communication plan and crisis stuff because you're going to be using it soon.
Speaking of crisis stuff, Rachel, a quick comment from you, please. One of the discussions we had today was how much do we disclose to the public based on the intelligence that we now have? How do you recommend at least 1 or 2 action items of how to modulate what's going out to the public at this point?
I think there's a balance that needs to be struck between giving the public critical information and also not freaking the public out to the point that they're not acting in their best interest, right? Because there was a lot of discussion, especially yesterday, about the whole public trust aspect of this. And I know tomorrow we're going to get into, misinformation and other kinds of levers that different nation states can pull when they're pulling off an attack of this scale. So, I think sharing information is important with the public, but sometimes you want to wait until the incident wraps up before you get really deep into the weeds of what exactly is going on.
Sounds good. There's a lot that we could unpack from today, but I really appreciate that we've come to understand that resourcing is now going to be a very big challenge, and how we resource this effectively and how we work within legislative frameworks, how we work as public sector, private sector, and as citizens as this breach unfolds and escalates. To our audience that's watching, a quick recap of what you can expect, or rather a quick sort of trailer in what you can expect tomorrow on day 3. We'll be covering impacts on travel, tourism, and hospitality, where we'll be looking at this point, this hasn't come up in the discussion, but we're sort of seeing it as Canadian citizens and residents that are impacted, but we do have folks from other countries here, we have different assets here, different interests located within the borders that this attack is happening. There'll be some discussion around that. We'll be looking at cross-border impact, because we will be seeing messaging coming out from utilities in the US, and as George had correctly pointed out, one of our primary allies will start to feed in information into this and look into our action plans. We'll then be covering what Rachel discussed really clearly, that's MDM, malinformation, disinformation, misinformation, before going into what does restoration in all of this look like. I trust that along with all of the leaders that are here at the table, I trust that all of you have benefited from this exercise. I know we have a great deal. Our scribes are making sure that we prepare our playbooks and our action items, which will be made available to you after the event is concluded. I thank you all for participating. I thank the AV team for making this happen, the team at CyberX, the province, and all of the partners that made Day 2 a wonderful success and a learning opportunity. I'll see you tomorrow as we dig deeper into the escalation and dig deeper into what our next steps need to look like. This is Ali Hirji signing off for Day 2. Thank you and see you tomorrow.